You're 4 years old, maybe 5. Your parents got one of those Nintendos that everyone's been raving about, along with a brand new game, a role-playing game. Other Nintendo games are good, sure, but this one's on another level, transporting you to a world full of mages, ogres, and all sorts of incredible sights and sounds. You get to control not just one hero but 4, each with his own equipment and character class. The music is so good, you sometimes leave the game on just to listen. It takes you dozens of tries to get past the wizards on bottom of the marsh cave. Every night you dream about flying around the world in an airship. One day your save file mysteriously vanishes. No big deal, you've got all the time in the world. You pick up the controller and jump back in. Let's get this out of the way. Final Fantasy XV is a great video game. It steers the series in a promising new direction, reveals a spectacular new world, and introduces a combat system as satisfying as any I've played. For all of its warts and wrinkles, and there are quite a few warts and wrinkles, Final Fantasy XV is often a thing of beauty. It's also a drastic departure from previous games in the series. Longtime fans may wonder whether Final Fantasy XV truly feels like a Final Fantasy game. Well, sure. FFXV has chocobos, Phoenix Downs, and 2 guys called Wedge and Biggs. It's got crystals, summons, a fantastic soundtrack, a great villain, and loads of references to its predecessors. As for the rest of it, the only constant in Final Fantasy has always been that there are no constants, so the 15th game fits right in. Yet FFXV is also disjointed and messy, full of technical issues and clunky story decisions. Really getting into Final Fantasy XV means accepting that you might see the same dialogue exchange about ebony coffee several dozen times and that you'll have to restart a few battles because the combat boundaries got screwy. You might run into random crashes that cost you hours of progress. The dungeons are remarkably well designed, but most of the side quests are simple and boring. The money system is frustrating. The story's got some issues. Like I said, warts and wrinkles. What's strangest about Final Fantasy XV is that it's essentially 2 games slammed together. For half a playthrough, or longer, depending how much you explore, you're on an extravagant road trip, driving from town to town and camping out under the stars. Then the game takes a sudden pivot, ditching the established framework and transforming into something else entirely, sort of like a reverse version of Final Fantasy VI. It's weird, it's jarring, and, ultimately, it works. If there's a lesson to learn from Final Fantasy XV, it's that a great set of main characters and a killer combat system can prop up just about anything. You're older now, and the latest Nintendo power has gotten you ridiculously hyped for a new role-playing game that's about to hit US shores. Word is, this one's got a story, a real story, on par with Animorphs and Narnia, full of twists and turns the likes of which you've never seen in a Nintendo game. When you load it up for the first time and hear that familiar arpeggio, chills run down your spine. You meet the Red Wings. You accidentally blow up a village full of innocent civilians. You watch your hero renounce darkness and embrace his destiny. You make your way around the world. Then you go underneath it. You fight demons on the moon and find out that the big bad guy isn't actually all that bad. You didn't realize that video games could tell such elaborate stories. You had no idea that games could actually make you care about their characters. Cecil and Kane and Rydia and Dutch and Rosa might just be pixels on a screen, but they're as real as anyone you know. One of the first things you see in Final Fantasy XV is a group of 4 beautifully coiffed men pushing a broken down car down the road. On the soundtrack, Florence and the Machine perform a haunting rendition of Ben E. King's Stand By Me. These 4 men are clearly good friends. They tease each other. They make bad puns. They gossip about girls and even have their own specific seats in the car, as is necessary for a proper road trip. I won't be afraid, Florence croons, just as long as you stand by me. This group is Noctis, a broody, sensitive teenage prince; Gladiolus, a brawny bodyguard; Ignis, an intellectual butler; and Prompto, a hyperactive marksman with a terrible sense of humor. Enjoyment of Final Fantasy XV hinges on how much you appreciate this group of characters, because the game focuses on their relationships above all else. Yet they aren't 4 equal partners. Noctis is royalty, and the others are ostensibly there to do his bidding. It's fascinating to watch Gladio, Ignis, and prompt to try to reconcile their commitment to servitude with what a pain in the ass Noctis can be. As the story progresses and the world starts falling apart, their responsibilities to him become more of an open question. How can they help Noctis perform his duty as a king? Should they? The dynamics of brotherhood are reflected in combat, too. Noctis is powerful alone, but he's way more effective when working with his friends. Cooperative attacks and techniques can do exponentially more damage than solo battling. One later section, which sees Noctis separated from his friends for an extended period of time, makes it clear both to him and to the player, Noct needs these guys. The road trip starts out jovially enough. Noctis and his gang set off for Altissa, a beautiful coastal city where Noctis is due to marry Luna, the princess of a nearby country called Tenebrae. Along the way, Noctis gets news that the evil empire of Niflheim has invaded his home city and reportedly murdered his father, King Regis. Noctis would have known this if he had watched Kingsglaive, the companion film to Final Fantasy XV that serves as an adequate but unnecessary prequel. The four brothers turn around, find themselves blocked out of their hometown, and set off on a new road trip to build up Noctis's power, meet up with Luna, and reclaim the powerful crystal stolen by Niflheim's nasty emperor. Soon enough the gang is driving around the world again, picking up side quests, listening to the radio, and bantering about nonsense. There's no new sense of urgency, as is perhaps inevitable for an open-world game. The designers at Square Enix rightly recognize that it would not be very fun for Noctis to spend the whole trip sitting in silence and thinking about his dad. Still, it's a little strange how quickly they all accept this new reality. Game Addicts subscribes for more videos.